Review of Chapter 23. Chapter 23 is the evolution of populations. Remember in Chapter 22 we mentioned that the population is what is subject to change, not the individual necessarily. So the first part of the notes of Chapter 23 are not very well represented in the book. In fact, the newer edition of the book took it out, but I want you to know it anyway. It's called the Modern Evolutionary Synthesis, also known as Neo-Darwinian Theory. See, evolutionary biology didn't really begin with Darwin, and it hasn't ended with him either. Evolutionary biology, as we know it today, began with the modern synthesis, which was basically a fusion of the sciences of the Darwinian model and population genetics into a much more comprehensive model of evolution. And that kind of coalesced in the 1940s. So be sure to read the notes under Roman numeral 1 under the modern synthesis. Roman numeral 2 talks about population genetics itself. Now keep in mind, in your lab book, you have a lot of this information as well. You can look that up as well. Now, part of what came out of the modern synthesis are the definitions of microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution is defined simply as a change in a population's gene pool. Any change in a population's gene pool for any reason. Macroevolution is on a grander scale, and it's really the origin of a new taxonomic group. Now, Chapter 23 deals with microevolution. Chapter 24 and later chapters deal with the other. Now, under Roman numeral 2, we have the definition of population. It's a group of individuals of the same species in the same area at the same time. Generally speaking, a species includes individuals that can interbreed with nature, but not with members of other species. We'll talk more about that in Chapter 24. Now, a gene pool is the total aggregate of genes in a population from all of the individuals that have them. Now, let's jump right over to the Hardy-Weinberg theorem. Now, population genetics is related to the Hardy-Weinberg theorem. We discussed this in lab. Hardy-Weinberg theorem states that for a population under ideal conditions, all that's really going on other than normal life events is reproduction. That alone should not change gene frequencies or how rare or common a gene is in the gene pool. So in other words, the theorem describes a non-evolving population. Now in your notes, I talk a little bit about the Hardy-Weinberg theorem. So if we're looking at allelic frequencies, let's say we're just looking at alleles big A and little a. The frequency, or how common the allele is represented by P or with Q. The frequency of the dominant allele can be expressed as P, the frequency of the recessive allele as Q. Now P and Q are not alleles, they're frequencies, they're numbers representing how rare or common they are. Now if there are only two alleles at this gene locus, their frequencies have to add up to 1, or 100%. So with the Hardy-Weinberg theorem, it describes a non-evolving population. Now, what makes this particularly useful for microevolution is that a population that satisfies the Hardy-Weinberg theorem is in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And if a population is in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, it is not evolving. Conversely, if it's out of equilibrium, then it is evolving. Well, how do we know? Well, this is how we know. If a population is in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, then the frequency of homozygous dominant individuals will be P squared, and the frequency of heterozygotes will be 2PQ, and the frequency of homozygous recessives will be Q squared. That's how we know. So you can actually sample a population's gene pool, get its allelic frequencies, and see if these add up or not. And if they don't, then it's out of equilibrium, something's going on. That population's undergoing microevolution. If it is in equilibrium, no microevolution happening. So in simplest terms, what causes evolution is anything that gets a population out of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Now, there are 5 conditions for equilibrium, and they're in your notes. Number 1, the population is very large. Number 2, the population is isolated. No migration of individuals in or out. Number 3, no mutations, or at least not enough to matter. Number 4, the mating is random. And number 5, there's no selection, meaning that everybody has an equal shot at reproductive success. So if all 5 conditions are met, then the population will be in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium theoretically forever, as long as those conditions are met and the population is not evolving. Conversely, If we violate any of these 5 conditions, then we will cause the gene pool to change. We will cause microevolution. And in the second part of this series, we'll talk about that.